let me know what you think in the comments. I love reading your comments, and this is the car I want you guys to interact with me over. Hello guys, and welcome to this Volkswizard video, which today is a very overdue one on Project Corrado Vr6. I introduced this car to the channel back in May, just after I'd bought it, and in that video I explained to you why I'd bought it. I'm still not exactly sure why I bought it, and I gave you a tour of the outside and the inside warts, of which there are many, and all. Well, today we're going to do something I've been putting off for a very, very long time, and just have a look underneath it to make sure it's all solid, and then go for a test drive. The reason I need to do this is because I'm about to spend a lot of money on the paintwork and on mechanical work, and I don't think it's worth doing that if the car is rotten as a pair underneath. Some cars are worth welding, like early Mark 1 Golf GTIs, but I think with Corrado VR6s there is really no need to weld them because there are some really solid cars out there. Well, let's find out how solid this car is right now by getting it up in the air. Okay, there she is up in the air. Now, I know a lot of you guys won't have the luxury of a vehicle lift, but if you're thinking about buying a modern classic like the Corrado VR6, or particularly if it's even older, this is a relatively young car at 27 years old, try and have a look underneath it before committing. And that's because the modern classic market has been booming for quite a few years now, and there are some people in the business that aren't planning to be around for very long. They're just taking advantage of the situation as it is right now. So there will be very shiny, very attractive cars in the adverts, but if you were to look underneath them, I think you might be put off, because it's amazing how different a car can be underneath when it's that kind of age. So let's see what kind of car my Corrado VR6 is underneath. Okay, first thing you see are the tank straps. These are famous for corrosion, and yeah, they're pretty scabby, but I think they're still pretty solid. They're available from the Corrado forum, where they were some nice shiny ones that don't corrode, so that'll be on the list. We've got a very shiny Jetex exhaust that I think was less than a year old, so that's nice, don't have to worry about that. But really, these are all superficial. We're more interested in structure, so let's look at where the quarter panel, rear panel and floor meet. That's pretty good there. There's a bit of surface corrosion there, but it's not taken hold yet. Likewise on this corner, it's pretty good. There's a bit of surface corrosion to the inner bits of the back bumper, but that's pretty normal. I'm not really worried about that because it's not structural in any way. Rear axle is good actually, quite a bit of black on there, which is unusual. Bear in mind these are barely painted when they leave the factory, so 27 years later that's okay. A bit crusty down there, but I think it's still solid. Rear shocks, very unattractive, but very cheap to swap out, so that would lift the back quite a lot if they were done. Likewise on that side, they do look original, which is slightly worrying. Likewise, the springs are looking pretty nasty, but we can deal with those and get rid of the SUV ride height at the same time. Over here, we've got a bit of corrosion on that brake pipe. Again, superficial, but probably would fail an MOT. Rear axle mounting, common Mark 1 failing. It looks pretty solid, actually. Might need a bit of sealing up to stop that getting worse. Again, sills, pretty good. Where it's been jacked, there's some corrosion, and around here, yeah, I think it's all right actually. It looks a bit crusty there, so that might need attention, just in that corner of the wheel arch and the sill, but it's not bad. The brake pressure regulator is looking a bit rusty, so maybe one for the future. Okay, floor pan, pretty good, but it's really the edges where the panels join that's the problem. So sills here, pretty good. As ever, jacking points have rubbed off the sealant, and corrosion is getting in there, so that needs to be dealt with. Let's have a look at this side again. Similar story, someone's been jacking it a bit too far back there, but it still looks pretty solid. So that's good really. I think those are the main areas on the floor. Oh, this area just get pounded with stones just here, and the wing is a bit crusty. Let's have a look at that from the outside. Again, wings are bolt-on, so not too much of an issue, but we will probably want to keep that original and deal with that before it gets worse. Wheel arch is all right, a bit of corrosion there, but we stick to the underside because you can't really see this. Wishbone's really kind of horrible looking, and there is a problem with where the bolt seizes into the subframe. I wonder if that's been dealt with there with that weld. So they need replacing really to look good. Splash guards on the back of the brakes there are crumbling away, so they'll need doing before they fall off. Front shocks again look pretty old and unsightly. Springs are a bit better. Anti-roll bars, again pretty ugly, but they're not too bad. We can see the chassis legs pretty easily on this car. Let's just get the camera around there. And they look pretty good. So if it had been crash damaged, it would have been crumpled and bodged and probably corroded really badly now. But no, they're pretty nice actually. That's good. That hub looks pretty nasty. So that's how far you go really. Bit of oil on the block there, but the sump is actually quite dry, and because of that it's corroded. And as with Mark IIs, when these get corroded they do tend to go porous and start leaking, so that will need doing. But it's not dripping oil. There's a bit of, well, there's quite a bit of oil there. I'm not sure where from. One to investigate, but it's not coming down the car very much, so nothing too urgent. End of the gearbox, that looks a bit crusty as well. That could look a lot better. Front cross member here. That takes the weight of the engine. That's pretty good actually. But this one, which is something to do with the radiator, I think looks a bit crusty. But you could probably get all these powder coated for not a lot of money and they look really good. Subframe, rear axle is really hard to remove, but yeah, it can be done. Okay, I think that's pretty good news then when it comes to the structural integrity of this Corrado. There is a bit more required than just painting the visible panels, which I guess is what most dealers would do to get it on sale. But underneath, what little corrosion is there, if we deal with it now, it won't take hold, and that's really important because all the time it's nice and shiny on top and you're driving it around and enjoying it. Underneath, the corrosion is just eating away at the metalwork like a car cancer. And at this point, I think we can avoid welding it, which is, for me, quite an important factor in whether I keep the car or not. So that's good. Now, I think we'll go for a test drive. I don't think we did a test drive before, but we want to look at it now from a tester's perspective and just assess where it dynamically needs improvement. The engine is set to be rebuilt by Stealth Racing, but there are other things as well, and it's these little bits and pieces that add up that make a project you think would cost you maybe £5,000 double. So let's go and drive it and see what we find. Okay, well, welcome to the interior of Project Corrado Vr6, and it's much like the cars I sold back in the day in here. It's done pretty well. The steering wheel's not particularly worn, the seats aren't ripped, there's a bit of hollowness to the bolster here that's easily fixed. If it was leather, like a store model, I can guarantee you after 27 years, 147,497 miles, it would be looking quite tatty, and this is actually still pretty good. The gear knob's a bit worn, but yeah, it is all right. There's a bit missing from the handbrake. Sunroof's a bit knackered. Yeah, that's another job to consider. But there's an Ed China video on how to fix it, so just copy what he did. My hair's going grey enough to be just like Ed. Now, because it's a car of the mid-90s when cars were being stolen all the time, even though it had a factory immobiliser, it was quite easy to override it, I gather. So insurers made you fit a Category 2 immobiliser. And this, unlike some of the very early ones, is passive arming. Basically, the insurers didn't trust the owners to do this, to arm the alarms or the immobiliser, so they armed themselves. And that means every time you get in the car, you have to put this into a little socket, which is just out of view behind the steering wheel here on the right with the red LED. And you've got about 30 seconds now to start the engine. And of course, when they went wrong, the cars wouldn't start and it was really awkward. So when with the Mark IV, which came out not long after this car, it was all integrated into the ECU, which made it a lot harder for thieves and a lot more reliable because there wasn't all this aftermarket wiring everywhere. Okay, in here we've got the Batman steering wheel, which is quite nice actually. It's a bit nicer than the Mark III Golf later ones that have got the airbag. It's just a just a horn in the middle, which works. We've not got air conditioning. We do have power steering. We've got an adjustable steering column that goes up and down, a bit like an Up GTI, but doesn't come out. We've got this lovely array of gauges with coolant temp, fuel, speedo up to 160, and a rev counter on the right with Corrado script in it. We've got like a really crappy feeling headlight switch that wobbles when you use it, but it seems to work. They do go wrong. Electric windows, no. Oh. Okay, 1 out of 2, ain't bad. Sunroof, yeah, we'll ignore that for the moment. Got the Carman badge on here. The car was actually built by Carman in Osnabrück, not in Wolfsburg. They were contractors to VW, and they did other cars as well. They did Ford Escort convertible, Renault Megane convertible. They've done some Porsches when Stuttgart was too busy, like the Boxster. So it's still a VW, but it's a slightly weird one. We've got the original book pack in this very 90s black plastic with a map of your local dealers. This is a pre-internet age car, by the way. Oh, look at that trick. Mark III. Yeah, pre-internet, so 94, internet was really in its infancy. We've got a CD player in there that makes it, the glove box, useless, and sort of stereo related stuff there. Okay, it's manual. There are automatics. Wouldn't necessarily recommend them, but if you find a nice one, I guess they're okay. Probably popular in London where it's a lot of stop-start traffic, or it was back in the 90s. Gear shift is quite long. It's a very early cable change, not particularly brilliant, but yeah. Right, clutch is nice and light. Doesn't necessarily mean it's any good though. Let's go, there's a lot of vibration from the trim. I guess if you're going to do the timing change, which this car does need, it's been notified to the previous owner that they were due by Stealth Racing. You'd do the clutch as a matter of course. There's a bit of scraping from the brakes. You've got to bear in mind this car has not been on the public road for about 5 months now. And we've got a cigarette lighter, but that doesn't work either. A little bit hesitant to pull off cleanly, and the throttle pedal feels strangely heavy, but yeah, I think the most obvious thing now is there's a lot of chattering from the trim. If you go over a bump like this one, everything just goes boom. And that's probably the most overpowering noise, rather than the sonorous narrow angle V6 under the bonnet. Everything just thumps around, and it's not like it's a firm car. It's got relatively compliant suspension. So I think I did drive this car in the original video and I did complain about how everything rattled. Well, let's now look at it from the perspective of what needs doing. So we're pretty much going to do shocks and springs all round. We're going to make it handle better, maybe ride worse, maybe rattle more, but sit a little bit lower, not overly. We're going to probably replace the front wishbones and splash guards on the front brakes, probably brakes all round, I'd imagine, because it's just not worth compromising. Brake pipes visibly pretty bad, and some of the hoses are looking a bit ripe. So it's just not really worth compromising on stuff like that, because it's relatively cheap and quite important. The big cost will be the timing chains. I've had a rough idea from Stealth Racing what a rebuild would be, and they're talking about £5,000 quite easily. So yeah, I mean, it does drive all right, you know, the engine's okay. It smells a bit oily on startup, which means, you know, valve stem seals or something like that, but obviously it's going to cost a lot more to rebuild an engine if the timing chain fails than it will do if the timing chain is worn but still intact. On the plus side, the ABS light goes out, which is a real common failing, but this car's obviously been through that and been repaired probably better than it was when it left the factory. So driving position, I think we're quite low, but maybe we can go lower. Oh yeah, it's just pull, there it is. Oh yeah, we can do the sort of very straight armed and straight legged driving position of a sports car in this car, which you can't do in a Mark III Golf. So yeah, it feels like a Porsche really. If you drive like a 944 of the same era, it feels pretty similar, or a 968. So even though it's a little bit ropey, it does drive okay. I'm just dreading having to take all the trim off and put it back on properly with new clips, which are probably obsolete. Right, into second. Box is not too obstructive in that respect. Brakes still feel a bit dirty. Okay, it doesn't like to rev, does it? It needs a good press of the throttle. Okay, 4,000 RPM, there is some acceleration. Even with this JetX, it's not particularly sonorous. The good news is the spoiler has come up. We're doing 70 miles an hour now to 70. It's quite a lot of road noise. I don't know, is it worth carrying on with it? There's just so much to do. And some of it I can't do. I've got to farm out to Stealth Racing in Southam in Warwickshire, who understandably charge good money for their expertise. But on the other hand, it is a solid car. It's probably a relatively solid investment. If I paid 10 grand for one, would it be any better than one of these that I've spent, this car with 7 grand spent on it? Probably not. And under that tunnel, it did sound quite good actually. It's warmed up a bit now, so it's getting close to operating temperature. Yeah, I think if the throttle pedal was a bit lighter, it would feel a little bit more enthusiastic. It's almost like the cable that goes to the throttle is a little bit stiff, which makes it seem reluctant. But if you just press it harder, it does go. But it's just that banging and shuddering that really annoys me, because I hate rattles in cars, and this is just one big rattle. Anyway guys, let me know what you think in the comments. I love reading your comments, and this is the car I want you guys to interact with me over. Do you want to come around and fix the rattles? Because I'll provide tea and coffee and beer if you can. But yeah, listen to it now. The JetX has got a little bit more boominess than standard. It's good. I've recently driven a Mark III Golf GTI, which is the same era of performance VW as this, and it certainly does not have the appeal of this car. So bearing in mind how bad the GTI was back in the day, this car must have been a revelation. Okay, alright then, let's see if we can make a decision by going for a drive on one of my favourite localish roads here near where I work. When I used to own my own Corrado Vr6, when I lived in Birmingham, this was the way I used to go home. It's much longer than the most direct route, but I used to love driving it on this road. A lot of those cars had a lot of money poured into them, mainly for suspension related stuff, and they handled really nicely. And even though this is well past its best at the moment anyway, you can still feel the inherent rightness in this platform. So we've got Mark II Golf suspension at the front. There was never anything wrong with the Mark II Golf, and at the back we've got the Passat of some sort, B4 rear axle, which has got passive rear steer bushes, which move, the axle moves when you corner to help you go around the corner, which was much more trick than the ones in Golf 2. So on an S-bend like this one, which I'm still a bit scared of with everything else slightly tired, it feels, yeah, it feels alright. But it can be a lot better. So yeah, I think we'll give it a go. If you think we should give it a go, just tell me in the comments. But I think it's got potential, especially with that engine, which now in the days of 4-cylinder turbo everywhere, if you're lucky to get a 4-cylinder, it is quite a special thing, isn't it? Anyway guys, thanks for watching this Vr6 video. As ever, if you've enjoyed it, please do give it a thumbs up, please do share, and please do subscribe, and please, as I said, do comment. And I'll see you for the next one very soon, hopefully the next episode of Project Corrado VR6 won't be 5 months away. Cheers.